Story 1. In 7th grade, there was this girl that was known for doing all kinds of weird shit. She cut a chunk of her hair off and left it on my friend's desk as a birthday present, meowed at people, and cried when anyone stepped on a bug. The most awkward incident happened when she dropped her pencil during a test. I guess she was too shy to ask the person next to her for it, so she tried to stretch for it and ended up flipping her desk over. She then continued to do her test on her desk sideways for another 10 minutes, until the teacher told another student to flip her over. Story 2. My professor for a computer science class had his phone go off during a lecture one day. He's a pretty chill old man, so everyone starts giggling, and some people are yelling at him to answer it. He looks at his phone and says, "Oh no, I'm not answering. My brother died today and I have to make funeral arrangements. I'll call back later." And then he moved on with his lecture. I've never seen a room so awkwardly quiet and sad. Story 3. I was in the 9th grade, and there was a girl in my classroom who broke both of her arms. So she had them in the cast that held her arms above her waist. Now, this girl wasn't the most popular, and she was best friends with another girl who was equally awkward as she was. I will never forget when my best friend raised her hand to get the attention of the teacher. The teacher called on her best friend, and she asked if she and her broken arm friend could use the restroom together. And the teacher asks, "Why would you need to go together?" She replies just like this: "I have to unzip and take off her pants." Looking back, I understand now that she just wanted to help her friend use the restroom. But imagine being in 9th grade and you hear this. Everyone in the classroom was silent. Then one kid started laughing. Then everyone started laughing. High school can be a B. Story 4. I had an English teacher who was admittedly a fat kid back in his high school days. He had a certain swagger and inexplicably mean and attention-seeking way about him that told us every day was a chance to act out mean girl fantasies he couldn't achieve as a once bullied 240 shorter. He lost all the weight and was now a tall, lean dude. He even took hip-hop classes and would sometimes bust out moves for the class. I hated this guy. One day, he strode up to a girl in our class who was devastatingly beautiful, but also a pretty kick-ass girl power kind of chick. She was doodling while he was lecturing, so he picked up her pencil bag. She was artistic, and this bag was full of supplies, and dumped it onto the ground, smirking. This badass bitch looks him dead in the eye and says, "Pick it up." He scoffs. "No." She goes, "That was completely inappropriate. Pick it up or I'm going straight to the principal and explaining how you just dumped my personal belongings onto the ground and tried to humiliate me." The class was dead silent watching this, and after a few tense moments, he slowly bends down and picks everything up. It took him a while, and it was the most cringy, awkward thing I have ever seen in my entire life. Story 5. This mentally handicapped kid in my class named Mark was always super infatuated with this really smart nice girl in our class. He would always talk about how he was going to make her his girlfriend, and she was always just too nice to him to tell him it wasn't going to happen. This went on for years. Anyways, one day, someone thought it would be funny to tell Mark I was dating the love of his life. I wasn't. Mark flipped his and found me in the hallway and pushed me up against this gigantic topographical plaster map of Alberta. The Rocky Mountains cut into my back as he pushed me harder into it and yelled into my face while crying about how Tessa was his girlfriend, and I needed to leave her alone. I told him I wasn't dating her, and he ran off crying. Poor guy. The Rocky Mountains cut into my back as he pushed me harder into it. No one on the face of the earth would remotely understand this statement without context, even if they tried. Story 6. In high school, I reached down for a binder that was in my backpack on the floor. I reached down to grab it, and when I repositioned myself upright in my chair, I ended up scooping the teacher's who was walking down the aisle with my head. We just kind of looked at each other in fear, and no words came out of either of our mouths. Nobody else saw it, or at least made a point to say that they saw it. I like to think it was just our little uncomfortable secret. Story 7. So, part of my job at the time had me meeting with teachers in schools to discuss alternative programs for students. One of the teachers had been working there for 20 plus years. She had job security, and would tell exactly what she thought. It leads to some awkward exchanges when discussing students. Things like, "Oh, he's crazier than a house rat. You don't want him in a place without heavy security." The most awkward, however, was when she said, "She really gets around for a girl with one arm, like a slot machine that pays out in bee jobs." Story 8. This was in middle school. The bell went off for us to go to our next class, and I noticed a girl had bled through onto her light-colored blue jeans. Even with me being the kind of boy that no girl would ever talk to if she wanted to keep what little status she might have had with the other girls in the school, I took the risk that might come with having a conversation with a girl. I quickly walked up right behind her, like creeper close, put my hands on her shoulders to get her to slow down a little, and I leaned in and whispered into her ear, "You've bled through your pants. I'll follow you to the girls' bathroom. Just act normal," and took my hands off her shoulders. She never looked back. She didn't even say a word. We walked nearly bumper to the girls' bathroom. I kept on walking past and off to my next class. I never spoke to her again. I don't remember her face or her name anymore, but I do wonder sometimes if I had crossed the line of creeper or kindness. No, not creeper. That is so awesome of you. My mother had the situation arise of the classic wearing a white skirt on the first day of her period, and the guy in her class that saw it first was not as kind as you. At all. I remember her telling me about it all those years after the fact. She could still clearly remember everything about that embarrassing moment 20 plus years later. Thank you for doing that for that girl. That was seriously an awesome thing to read today. Story 9. One time, one of my friends was emptying out his backpack on his desk looking for his phone or something when the teacher noticed that he had Midol, period relief medication, in his bag. The teacher asked him why he had it, and he said it was for the headaches, not knowing its main purpose. Everyone in the class, including the teacher, bursted out laughing and quickly told him what it was really for. It was really only awkward for him, I guess, but it was funny as hell. Also, I talked to him later, and he said the real reason he had it is because he had a drug test coming up, and he smoked pot a week before, and he read that Midol could help cleanse your system to pass the test. Obviously, he didn't want to tell the teacher this though, so he said it was for headaches. A lot of people have been saying it's actually good for headaches, but I'm pretty sure he had no clue. Also, the teacher really hated this kid, rightfully so. Also, this wasn't the first time he has been the center of attention either, so he was used to it. Story 10. I remember a substitute teacher that we had for a few days when I was in middle school. She was pretty overweight, and one day she grabbed a chair from an empty desk to help someone out with their assignment, when suddenly we heard a loud crash. One of the legs on the chair had broken, and she was flat on her back. It was hard not to laugh. But what made it even worse is, as she was getting up, she ended up farting very loudly. The entire class erupted in a fit of laughter, and she had to leave the classroom because she was so embarrassed. Story 11. I went to school with this kid. I think his name was Matt. Matt was in a wheelchair, but he was a fucking dickhead. He used to sing NSYNC in the hallway and run into girls with his wheelchair. You could tell he was socially fucked up from being the wheelchair kid, but you could also tell he knew how to play the wheelchair card like a champ. Eventually, the school started giving him punishments for being such a douchebag. So I'm sitting in the in-school suspension room. It's f***ing packed because in-school suspension is awesome, and there was a substitute that day. Matt's in there too. He was being a dick, but then quieted down. So I'm sitting there, probably a little stoned, and I see Matt start rolling towards the door super slow. I look over at the teacher, and she has her head down, probably doing a little self-loathing, because who the f*** wants to be the in-school suspension teacher? And so I look back, and he keeps rolling closer and closer to the door. I gave him a look. I co-signed this shit. He grabs the handle, and that's when the teacher looks up. He f***ing bolted out of the door. The teacher yells, runs out into the hallway, and he's nowhere to be found. She gets on the phone and tells whoever's on the other end that Matt just rolled out of the classroom. It was pretty awkward, letting a kid in the wheelchair escape the room. Story 12. There was this couple in my math class who had broken up. The guy sat behind the girl for the rest of the year. One day, John goes to the washroom, and while he's out, some guy who sits close to him opens his bag and quietly starts pulling out its contents and very quietly places them on his desk. There's the usual things, and then there's a bottle of hand lotion, some 8x10 glossies of his ex, some other pictures of her as well. Those get piled on the desk too. John returns, sees the items on the desk and loses his mind and starts swearing. Now, everyone is looking over, including his ex, who says, "What the F? I thought you said you gave all those back." Everyone sees what she's talking about. It was very uncomfortable. Story 13. We had a math teacher that was a bit effeminate, so naturally students spread the rumor that he was gay. He had some of those really long rulers in the classroom, and one day a ruler toppled over, neatly into the crack of his ass as he was leaning down to help a student. He let out a surprised "ooh" sound. We laughed, and the poor guy was subjected to even more rumors and jokes. We also had a substitute teacher we referred to as Pierce Brosnan. He looked like the actor, but with a huge scar on his face. He was notoriously known for smelling like chicken tikka. Kids in his class would drive him bat crazy, to the point where he'd slam his hands on the desk and yell, "Shut up!" at the top of his lungs. Of course, this only encouraged the kids to tease him more. Oh, another one. We had this really awesome French teacher. He'd bring in French candy, tell us stories about when he was young, and all around was just a great teacher. Aside from his temper, there was this bastard of a kid in my class who would wind up the class, and one day, our teacher had had enough of it. He threw his whiteboard pen on the floor as hard as he could, slowly walked up to the kid, maintaining eye contact the entire time, and verbally tore him to shreds. The kid was crying and red-faced, complete with snot trails, as he was sent out of the room. Nobody dared even breathe as our teacher slowly walked towards the pen he had thrown. He picked it up and casually said, "Huh, oops, I broke the pen." The class giggled, but those were some intense minutes. Story 14. Freshman year of high school, circa 1990. We had a new history teacher fresh out of college, and he quickly gained a reputation for being a pushover. He was also notorious for never looking at the class. If this guy was reading to us from the book, we might as well have been smoking meth or something for all he knew. My class decided to do a cattle drive, where we would all slowly scoot our desks toward him. Being the deviants that we were, we chose the day he was being evaluated by the principal to do this. It did not take long before we were literally at his feet. Some of the students even went past him and had their desks against the chalkboard. He never looked up from that book. The principal, however, was not amused. She took him out in the hallway and chewed him out very loudly. The entire school heard. He came back into the classroom, looked at the carnage we had created, loosened his tie, and laughed. Then he sat down at his desk and smoked a cigarette. He was fired at the end of the year. Story 15. Okay, so it was senior year of high school, and I was taking a pre-calc class. It was my first class, and started at 8 a.m. The teacher was walking us through some problems on the board, when she stopped and called on a student with her hand raised. This wasn't just any student, but our valedictorian and head cheerleader. She dressed in the nicest clothes every day and spent probably 2 hours before school doing her hair and makeup. So she calls on this girl, and the whole class looks to see what she has to say. We look over, and she has her cheeks full of something, looking like a chipmunk. All she does is open her mouth to try to speak, and vomit spews from her mouth all over her desk and the back of the guy in front of her. No one says a word. She stands up, sprints to the front of the room, and tries to round the corner to head towards the door. She slips on her own vomit and falls on her ass as her shoe goes flying across the room. She stands up, faces the class, and looks at all of us in complete horror, before breaking down into tears, and runs out of the room wearing only one shoe. It felt like something out of a TV show. Story 16. In middle school, my arch nemesis, we'll call him Blondie because F that guy, picked on me a lot. It started out as pretty casual, but it progressed to the point of detentions, calls to the principal's office, and in-school suspensions. The hatred was mutual. We had the same gym class at the end of the day. One day, I had to use the bathroom before we went home for the day, so I went into the locker room, did my business, and then came back out to play. We were playing soccer or something, and everyone was out there. We finished up and we all came back into the locker room, and I heard a bunch of guys saying things like, "Dude, what is that? What is that, man?" A smile came over my face as they all came to realize that someone had pissed all over his backpack. Once they realized it, they all laughed and made fun of him. Haha, someone pissed all over Blondie's backpack. Dude, someone pissed on your backpack. It was me. I never told anyone. And when I heard the guys talking about it and making fun of him, it was like a buffet of revenge at Restaurant Vengeance. Story 17. Stuck in the gym after the school went on lockdown because of planned student walkouts over immigration protests in Los Angeles. Anyways, there was this kid who was really into Naruto. Stocky, ginger, terrible acne, and always playing his hands like he was doing Naruto spells at people. Needless to say, he was not the apex of the social hierarchy. This, however, didn't stop him from pairing up with a girl who was just as different as he was. So a few hours into the lockdown, teachers start looking and counting kids to make sure no one went off the reservation. And when they start looking for Naruto Boy, he's under the bleachers with the girl, squeezing each other's zits and eating whatever came out. Story 18. I took a weightlifting class in high school. My school was pretty great with including the special education kids in a variety of classes, this one included. One of the kids, we'll call him Benny, was on the elliptical and doing his thing until all of us smelled straight shit coming from the cardio area. Turns out, Benny pooped his pants, and it not only leaked out of his pants, but got all into the nooks and crannies of the machine. It was a lot, and he kept going. It was hard not to laugh at this, especially when someone yells from across the room, "Finish that mile, Benny!" Story 19. In the span of 2nd to 4th grade, there was a boy named William at my school. William was very smart, and knew that he was very smart. So much so that if he as much as missed one question on any test, he would have a full-on meltdown. The aforementioned meltdowns were some of the funniest things I've seen, and often resulted in awkwardness. The first incident was when he missed a question on his math test, and proceeded to tear his test up and throw it away. Then he cussed out our teacher for being a heartless bitch, and picked up a desk and threw it at her. Then he kicked her and stormed out. The next incident was when he missed 3 questions on a history test. He promptly got out of his chair and walked out of the classroom. He did not come back. When the bell rang, we tried to leave, but the door was jammed shut. William had gone and found a small stick and jammed it into the door in such a way that it jammed it, and it made it so that nobody on the inside could get out. The incident that resulted in his expulsion was when he actually missed 6 on a test out of 10. He went on an absolute rampage. Think the Hulk. He flipped over desks, punched every kid he could, threw chairs across the room. The principal arrived at a prompt chair to the gut, followed by a crazed preteen trying to kick, claw, and bite him. William was entertaining to say the least, but looking back, I realize he most likely had some form of mental disorder that caused him to excel in academics, but fail in social and stressful environments. I like to imagine he's out there somewhere, leaving havoc in his wake.
Being popular for the wrong reasons. As soon as you graduate, that stuff starts over. Better not to rely on being popular and prepare. The best advice my sister, who graduated 2 years ahead of me, gave me in my senior year was, you are not going to talk to 99% of the people in your class ever again after you graduate. It took me a bit to internalize it, as I was in denial at first, but as the year went on, I slowly realized that it was true and that I was better off just hanging out with the people I wanted to keep as friends post-high school. And to this day, 15 plus years after high school, it still holds true that I talk with exactly one person, my best friend, from my high school. Worrying about what other people think. The concept of cool in the first place. My brother and I, in our early 30s, were watching a group of teenagers trying so hard to put on this cool, unemotional facade at Disneyland, while everyone else around them just enjoyed themselves, and were laughing to ourselves that teenagers are so afraid of displaying emotion or passion, and nobody else cares. But we all went through it, and we all reached the realization that it's more fun to just enjoy ourselves. Bullying. For example, that thing where they comment "oh" on people's posts and then claim to just be saying "oh." Everyone knows it's not innocent. It's done with the purpose of making the poster feel insecure or dumb. Just things that can be played off as small, but that they know will have a bigger impact. I know exactly what you're talking about. Not because I'm cool and up to date on the trends, but because my 16-year-old explained this to me yesterday, it definitely seems like peak passive aggressiveness. Talking back to teachers and laughing in their faces, bullying others, smoking and drinking, and then bragging about it. Acting alter when they are just following the trend and do not really belong there. Following a major trend to feel different, rebellious, or cool is peak irony. Being loud and obnoxious wherever they go. Like, dude, no one thinks you or your friends are cool over there yelling peace and moaning because you think it's funny. I own a store kids frequent, and I have had to tell them more than once to shush. The volume got so loud once, an actual paying customer was uncomfortable. Little shiz. Being edgy and offensive just for the sake of it. Yeah, we get it. Do you think that mocking dead people or posting racist or sexist stuff on social media makes you a tough edgelord not to be effed with? No, it just makes you look like a complete tryhard. Pretending to have some type of disorder, like that makes them special. Like somehow everyone has multiple personalities now. One of the rarest disorders of its kind, and everyone and their cousin suffers from it. I don't know how vaping caught on with young people. Cigarettes I get. They were in the mouths of movie stars and icons. I can see why the Marlboro Man was cool. Vaping? Without all that cultural background, how is it cool for kids? The anti-cigarette campaign was hugely successful in making kids not have any interest in them, so a window opened up for companies to get the next generation hooked on nicotine with something new that people hadn't seen before. Vapes were heavily marketed to kids, and most vape shops don't ID, so it became super easy to get and popular. Dressing and acting in a way to be original and different. Those clothes, that style, and those movies are all created, advertised, and sold to a certain type of teenager. You're not being different, you're just conforming to a niche that companies have created. Oversharing on social media. Which, to be fair, isn't exclusive to high schoolers, but I don't know. You'd think there would be more care for privacy. And I don't mean things like what they had for breakfast. I mean kids with large followings that share too many details about their personal info, life, location, etc. Or kids that have open Instagrams with randoms following. But this really depends on the content they're posting too. Still young enough to remember high school clearly, old enough to understand how cringy me and other people were. Here's a list. Acting like you do not care about other people and most stuff. You do, you just cannot defend your actions. A fair amount of people keep this even after high school. Definitely attitudes regarding drugs and alcohol are not much present where I went, but it is really too common around certain countries. Never listening to anyone, acting like an a-hole, and talking over other people. You can see so many streamers being idolized for this kind of behavior. Acting like you are the only one having problems in the world. Not trying to understand other people. Being an ungrateful little shit even to your parents. The list can go on with other stuff. Heck, people grow out of certain stages, but others do not. I really wish kids in high school had better role models around them. Cannot really put too much blame on them. If they act like that, most of the times it's because they learned it from their parents and seniors. Doing TikTok dances in public. Being in a large group and being loud in public to get attention. Driving fast and causing an accident or killing people for likes or fake internet points. Trying to be all political, spouting all sorts of talking points without actually understanding any of them and how they would affect people's lives, the economy, and the future. This is where the difference between memorization and critical thinking becomes very clear. This is also why, when they're asked to explain themselves, they are unable to. Immediately showing support for all sorts of things or joining groups and movements that they do not understand just because they sound good or it would make them look cool on social media. Dating an adult. Had many friends who were dating men in their 20s while they were 15 or 16. I didn't think it was cool, but I remember not thinking it was that weird. Now that I'm an adult, I realize just how creepy it is for 20-year-olds to be dating someone whose brain is not yet fully developed. Vaping. I'm sorry, but if you're gonna smoke, smoke like a man. LMAO. I'm kidding, but it takes away the cool and rebellious vibe when someone's smoking and it smells like candy floss and strawberries. I get it if you've gone from smoking a pack a day to vaping, but if you've just started because all your friends are doing it, it's just cringe, in my opinion. I think subtle or indirect bullying, right? My kids' school had a walkout, or LGBTQ, and as they were standing outside, a crowd drew around them. That crowd yelled derogatory remarks at them, grabbed the posters the walkout kids had made, and shredded them up and threw the shreds up in the air, grabbed and broke a microphone they had, and threw water bottles at them. Oh, and laughed and pointed. To me, hearing about it both from my kids and from the school's principal, it seemed like some movie about bratty elementary school kids. The most immature thing I may have ever heard of. This was a high school. In my senior year, all the lower class boys, freshmen and sophomores, seemed to have a fascination with stealing soap, toilet paper, and paper towels, causing our administrators to cut off every men's room for the students, so if a guy wanted to go to the bathroom, they were pretty much out of luck. Even during lunch, the girls' bathroom was open, but the boys' was closed. One day, I went to the bathroom in between classes on a lucky day where the bathroom was open, and there was a whole sink detached from the wall and sitting on the floor. I don't expect every school to be like this, but man, I detest those little shiz rat kids for destroying the bathrooms, and to a lesser extent, the administration for not coming up with something better than cutting the bathrooms off entirely, though it's hard to blame them. Basically, anything they do to try to appear more mature. It's always extremely self-destructive and harmful to their long-term mental health. Notably, some invade adult spaces and sometimes lie to adults about their ages. Until you are 18, you are a child. Even then, you're only an adult legally. Stop pretending you're older than you actually are. Claiming that something was better back in the day and because that they were born in the wrong generation. F off with that. It's so darn cringy. Sure, things aren't perfect, but there are always problems no matter what point in history you look at. But you can't tell me that going back to a time of worse technology, more racism, worse medicine, worse labor conditions, worse communication, local and worldwide, worse ability to travel, etc., 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 is better because one single subjective thing was better. Pull your head out of your A. Sure, we have problems because of a small portion of people, but overall, things are better than they've ever been, are getting even better, and will start improving even more quickly as the generation that has caused the most worldwide issues starts dying off. Their lingo. My younger brother, 17, is a football player, and whenever he comes home from practice, I swear it's like he's speaking a different language. He talks about how his friend has no riz or pull, and it's not like he's not smart. He's applying for Ivy League schools for next year, and there are times I seriously need to sit him down and say, "You're talking like an F-boy, and it needs to stop." Moaning about parents. I know they seem noisy and overprotective, but they're almost certainly as bemused by your teenagedom as you are inside, and are just doing their best. Of course, they haven't forgotten what being young is like, but your youth is so different, and they remember their own foolish, risky behavior, and want to shield you from harm and heartache. Being a jerk to the police for laughs. Still remember one time mates and I, in our mid-20s, were sitting down on the foreshore car park, drinking while having the car play music. Meanwhile, a large group of younger kids in their teens was sitting on the other end of the car park on the grass hill, also drinking but being a bit noisier. Anyway, the cops showed up and went to us first, and as soon as they got out of the car, we were all saying evening to them and asking how their night was going. They just took one look at the picnic bench that was covered in bottles of alcohol, looked at the car, and asked who was driving. Made replies that he was only drinking 2 cans for the night to keep sober. With that, the cops were happy and chatted for a bit, before they wished us a good night. They then went up to the other group, and as soon as they got there, we could hear these kids calling them pigs and throwing a can at them, all while laughing, thinking it was funny. Guess which group stayed drinking on the beach, and which group was hauled off in multiple police cars. In case I get asked, too, this was mid-90s in Australia, where the legal drinking age is 18. It was also a small place where public drinking wasn't legal, but tolerated by the police as long as you didn't make a mess or cause trouble. Not being afraid of anything. They aren't afraid to get yelled at because it's just words. They aren't afraid of being smacked by an adult or authority for not listening or following instructions because it's highly illegal. What they aren't learning is how easily they will be let go from a job for not listening or following instructions. In my eldest child's friend group, hating on children. Not the usual, "I'm not a fan of babies," or the jokingly, "I'm a vegetarian" when someone hands you a baby, but encountering a toddler at Walmart and saying loudly, "Let's play baby football," staring at said kid. The friend is mad because I refused to take her anywhere with us after saying, "So?" when I called her out on this behavior. My eldest can only see her at school now. Being cool. It's great to have friends, it's great to fit in, but adapting yourself to the concept of cool instead of developing yourself and your actual personality is such a waste. What is cool in high school isn't really cool anywhere else and won't last, but the person you are will last, so find out about yourself and forget about being cool. Frankly, I don't care. So long as it's not actively harmful, let high schoolers find whatever they want cool. I was so scared of being cringe all throughout my high school life, and you know what that got me? A whole lot of nothing but social anxiety. Do you know what I'm proud of myself for? Wearing a stupid outfit that would probably be considered cringe in my yearbook. Don't be scared to be cringe. You'll make more friends, find new hobbies, and maybe even learn skills that actually are positive to you in the long run. 100% guaranteed. Older you is going to be cringing at stuff you thought while you were younger, regardless of how hard you try to not be cringe. I work at various high schools on a regular basis, and I don't actually think Gen Z does a lot of cringe stuff at all. My generation was effing garbage. I'd rather go to high school now. I think some of the most problematic things I've seen is the fact that these kids are so active on social media that they're not going to get to grow up without a permanent record of stupid stuff they've said and done. Hanging out in the school parking lot. I don't know if that's a common one, but I'm from a pretty small town, and people would always gather in the parking lot and drink and fight. Not even during the school week either. Like on a Saturday night, they would do this. It was cringe to me when I was still in high school, and it was always all the preppy kids that thought they were gangsters because their parents bought them lifted trucks. Littering on my effing lawn. I moved to a nice house that happens to be in direct path between a high school and restaurants for lunch. The amount of trash students just blatantly litter along the way there causes me to believe that these little twats actually associate littering with being a bad boy and by extension getting women, which to me is super cringe as well as annoying AF. Now I'm one step away from being a 32-year-old man yelling at kids to get off my lawn. For guys especially, the idea that literally any display of enthusiasm is uncool. Dude, talking in a bored monotone isn't cool. It's boring. You're boring. Life isn't a competition to see who can seem the most apathetic. And guess what? You didn't invent nihilism. You weren't the first person to discover the world isn't fair. You aren't some subversive genius who sees that the oldsters are too blind to see. When people 10 plus years older than them are flirting with them, it's pathetic, gross, or a misinterpretation of flirting by the teen. That's about it. I had crushes on so many of my teachers when I was a teenager. One of my teachers was cool in how he tried to be on the level with students, so I immediately found him hot and vulnerable. I recall in 2005 I was 15 and working in an art studio on a clay mold, and my teacher came in and laid down on one of the tables across from me and said he was just going to rest for a nap, and he complimented the music I was playing from a speaker as I was sculpting. My 15-year-old self thought, OMG, he's flirting with me! Teachers just need to be better with making boundaries than high schoolers, because I interpreted this at the time, as did my friend, that he was flirting with me. No, it's not cool to flirt with teenagers. It's not cool to be the cool teacher around teens when the consensus seems to be that you're flirting. Flashy RGB nonsense on computers and electronics. When you're playing your game in a dimly lit room, nothing shatters immersion more than some pulsing rainbow bright BS dancing in your peripheral vision. It's absolutely hideous. Even worse when you're sitting far away from the screen and have a glowing alien cereal box fluttering enchantingly right next to where your attention is supposed to go. Just why? And yeah, I'll admit I got a PC with light up fans a while back. I got it because I thought it would be neat to have some stylish magenta lighting under my desk. But then I got tired of magenta. Went with a nuclear core blue. Got tired of blue. Went with a cool green. And then I just got tired of the lights. Like, all of the lights. Didn't just turn off my case fan lights, but the electrical tape over every light I don't need. Monitor power indicator? Taped. PC power? Taped. USB hubs, charging cables, power supplies, external drives, taped. So when I see YouTube channels proudly displaying cases from the Mickey Mouse Disco Dimension, I just scream and scream and scream. I can't legitimately complain, how does anyone think this is cool? Because I thought it was cool. But I can also say that after years of sitting beside the gimmick, I found the most pleasant experience was just removing the gimmick completely. I only turn it on when my 6-year-old niece visits. She likes the lights. She thinks they're fun. So there you have it, teenager computer builders. You did it! You have the taste of a 6-year-old girl. RGB is cool when done right. I agree. If everything is rainbow all the time, it will look awful. But if you put time into syncing your lights, figuring out what looks good when lit up and what doesn't, you can make RGB look really nice and clean. When they hang out at the grocery store I work at, the high school is just right down the way and so many of them just show up and just hang out, around 20 plus of them, and only 1 or 2 ever buy anything while the rest scream their heads off at each other before they all pile out like a massive living collecting body parts. I went to that same school and never hung out at the store. Never went unless I had the money. A bunch of losers. Skipping school to join a demonstration protesting single-use plastic, microplastic in the oceans, and petroleum use in general. Then leaving the streets absolutely littered with plastic wrappers and plastic bottles, all while using their plastic glass lithium phones to post about their polyester clothes, their gas-guzzling SUVs, and their virtuous fight to save the planet. Not listening to anyone. There's a reason people tell you things sometimes. They don't want you to learn the hard way. Of course, many people like to stick their noses in things that aren't their business, and you can ignore them. However, being able to tell the difference between people with too much time on their hands and people who want to help you is a good skill to have. Probably everything. Anything that's popular now will be out of style in a decade, and people will look back as they always do and say, I can't believe I wore that or had that hairstyle. I realize that everything that seems cool eventually becomes passé and gets abandoned. The coolest people are actually all the elderly people.